Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. What to know about traveling to Iceland with Nat Hab, presented by Nat Hab's Head of Field Operations, Renata Haas, and Expedition Leader, Heather Chrystie. It's a pleasure to have you both with us today. Renata, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kendall. I am loving diving into these trips a bit more, and I am so pleased to be doing this webinar with Heather, Miss Heather Chrystie. She and I have actually been working together for quite some time, so I'm really happy to be able to take the time with her and talk about Iceland. Well, Heather, I would love for you to give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself.
Sure, thanks Renata. I also am really excited to be here talking to all of you who want to learn more about Iceland or maybe are already signed up to come traveling with us this summer. I've been guiding natural habitat trips for the past 6 or 7 years now. I guide in several different locations for Nat Hab now as well, mostly in the Arctic. So one of the first places that I worked for them was up in Churchill, Manitoba, which has a nice Arctic ecosystem as well, seeing polar bears and things like that. And I've been going to Iceland for the last few years as well, finding it an incredible place, not only as somebody who's into geology and natural history as I am, but also just as a traveler to go around and experience such a fantastic and diverse country.
Thanks so much, Heather. And I am Renata Haas. I have been with Natural Habitat for 7 years, about the same time that Heather has been. And I have overseen quite a few of our destinations in Churchill, in the US, Greenland, and now what I do is oversee our field team. And along with that, since COVID started, I actually also oversee the COVID protocols that Nat Hab has created for traveling during this time. So before we dive into all that is Iceland and the absolutely phenomenal trip that it is, what I want to do is take some time to speak with everyone on this call about what our protocols are, how we created them, how we sort of monitor them, and what that might look like for you on a Nat Hab trip, because it's definitely something that we are all dealing with on a daily basis. So first and foremost, the protocols that we created took a tremendous amount of work. We actually have a team of individuals in our office that once COVID started and we knew we wanted to start running trips again, we met daily to create these protocols, and still now meet weekly or bi-weekly to look at our protocols and update them. But when our team was developed, we determined that it was really important to have a strong skeleton of these protocols. And I should note that we've actually been running trips since this last July. So we've been running trips in the US, in Florida, Yellowstone, Costa Rica, Mexico, Kenya, the Galapagos, and we are ramping up for a pretty big summer. And during the course of all of these trips, we haven't had any transmission cases of COVID-19 through our staff or guests, and it's because we're really taking these protocols incredibly seriously. So that being said, the first component of developing these protocols is to do a lot of research. So we created the skeleton by utilizing recommendations from both the CDC and World Health Organization. Once we established our skeleton, we then determined that it was important to create and look at best practices between multiple companies within the outdoor and adventure travel industry. So we had a lot of meetings with a variety of companies to understand what they were doing as well. So not only can we share best practices, but we can also ask questions and exchange information. After collaborating with other industry leaders, we then need to determine how we were going to vet all of our partners in the field. So not only have we created a protocol for ourselves and our company, but we need to look at every restaurant, hotel, transportation partner, and create a set a vetting process so that we can ensure that their COVID protocols are meeting or exceeding our standards. Then we created a screening process. So this includes a health questionnaire that all guests fill out before they start their trips. And we also do temperature checks and symptom checks during the trip as well. After figuring out a screening process, we then need to ensure that we are training everyone that's going to be working with guests on these trips. So prior to sort of the start of each season, the guides and field staff will meet with myself, and we will have a long, in-depth training on the specific protocols and how to implement those protocols in the field. Now, we do this before every season because a trip that leaves tomorrow could look much different from a trip that leaves in, let's say, June, July, or August. And it also could be different depending on where the group is actually going. So we have to make sure that we create those trainings for the specific location. And then we also make sure that we're setting expectations for our guests. We set those expectations by making sure that we are very transparent in what our protocols are going to be. We make sure we have that information on our website. Anyone that signs up with us within their pre-departure briefing is going to get additional information. And we also want to make sure that our guests and guides can participate in reducing their risk even before they leave their house. So you actually, if you sign up for a trip with Nat Hab or you're on a trip with Nat Hab, in your pre-departure briefing, you'll be mailed 2 KN95 masks, hand sanitizer, sanitizing wipes, and also some information on how to mitigate your risk while you are traveling. So we put a lot into these protocols. And that being said, I wanted to take a little bit of time and focus on what those components, the big components of the protocols are. Now, we focus on a combination intervention approach, and that essentially means that the optimal way to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus transmission is a combination of interventions. So first and foremost is respiratory hygiene. We're all incredibly used to all of these combination interventions, but we want to ensure that we are wearing masks when we're inside vehicles, inside buildings, around guests that are not part of our group. And then in some cases, depending on the regulation of the country, it could be the case that we needed to wear them at other points as well. Some countries have a mandate that you wear masks outside. It'll just depend on that specific country. After respiratory hygiene is hand hygiene. As I've noted before, we send out hand sanitizer, but it's also important that you have, or we have hand sanitizer provided to you when you are on your trip, and also ample opportunities for you to wash your hands before meals, after meals, and if you're ever touching something that might have been touched by somebody else. Next is physical distancing. We're all incredibly used to this. We are lucky to be running, Nat Hab just runs small group tours. So when you have 10, 12, 14 people in a group, it is incredibly easy to socially distance. But we try to create more space for our guests to be spread out. So going to locations at earlier times, creating more private events, utilizing private vehicles, and even for things like meals, eating outdoors as much as possible, or in a private space where we can be spread out. And then finally is enhanced sanitation. So we do make sure that we are sanitizing high touch surfaces frequently, and if there's any type of equipment that's utilized by multiple individuals, that it's sanitized in between use. So that is the overarching components of our of our COVID protocols. Now, again, I should say that a trip that leaves tomorrow is going to look different from a trip that leaves in June, July, and August. And that's because we are seeing a lot of developments in the distribution of vaccines, not just within the US, but globally. I'm sure that everyone on this call has either gotten vaccinated or knows someone that has gotten vaccinated or has their vaccination date lined up, which is incredibly exciting. And the rest of the world is starting to make progression towards us. The US is obviously going at a pretty substantial pace, but we are getting there, and that is good news. That being said, there's a lot of questions involving what is Nat Hab's requirements for testing and vaccines. So starting July 1, Natural Habitat will be requiring vaccines or proof of vaccination by an FDA approved or WHO recommended vaccine for all of our trips. And this is for a few reasons. One, it helps mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and will get us to a place where this is not something we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, but it also protects those within the communities that we are going to. So that is why Natural Habitat has gone the direction of requiring that. Iceland itself has some specific requirements as well. Prior to arriving to Iceland, you do need to fill out a form. You do need to show proof of vaccination when you arrive to Iceland as well. And then at this point in time, it is also required that you get tested on arrival, which is essentially the airport facilitates. And again, if any of that, if those requirements change and you are on a trip to Iceland this summer, we will be sure to update you on those changes. And currently there is a testing requirement to get back into the United States. That is also something that Natural Habitat will organize and facilitate that for you. So essentially you don't need to worry about it. Just at some point before you head back home, you and the rest of the group will get your COVID-19 test and then be ready to have that documentation to head back to the US. That being said, those are all the things COVID. I think we are all incredibly excited to talk about Iceland and hear more about Heather's extensive knowledge in the area. But Heather, first and foremost, before we start getting into what it's like to go on this trip, I want to know what lights you up about this program and why you enjoy going in Iceland so much.
I'm so excited to talk about this. I've missed it so much. So I would like to say that one of the most spectacular things about traveling in Iceland is the geology. And I hope I didn't lose you on that one. Don't stop listening. Most places don't have geology like Iceland. Iceland has an incredible, diverse, living, dynamic geology. It's alive in a way that you don't see in other places. And so as we travel through Iceland, every vista that we see, every landscape that we experience, you can just feel how youthful that landscape is and how it's developing and changing really practically on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis at least. And so you can really experience the geology in Iceland in a way that I don't think you can do in many places in the world. As a geology buff, I find that very exciting. And as people who are not particularly into geology, you can find that really exciting too. And every landscape is different. We'll see waterfalls, glaciers, mountains, coastal landscapes, the whole lot. And through it all is this incredible dynamic geology that we have. But as of anywhere, the geology is just one part of it, right? It's the basis of the ecosystem that we experience while we're there. And a trip to Iceland really means being witness to the incredible Arctic explosion of summer life. And the geology is just the bottom rung of that, right? As we look at the waterfalls or the coastlines and things like that, we'll be surrounded by a huge diversity of birds and sea life, and the way those things come together is just a big part of the Icelandic experience. I would call this an an ecosystem immersion trip more than a specific wildlife trip. It's kind of different to an African safari. We're not going out saying we're going to see this many charismatic megafauna today. Instead, we're going out and experiencing the ecosystem as a whole. And I feel like you can feel the energy in Iceland everywhere we go, and that really comes from this near 24/7 light that they have during the summer. So I would say Iceland just feels different to other countries, whether it's the rocks or the birds or the other wildlife or the people or just the experience that we have there. It feels energetic and vibrant and alive. Of course, no country is complete without its people, and I think the Icelandic people are just some of the most fantastic people that we have. We're really lucky on these trips. We get to work with some incredible local guides, so we get to know local people as friends throughout the course of the trip. And I would say Icelandic people, one of the most important things to know before you travel anywhere is how are the locals going to react to me as a traveler, right? And in Iceland, they're humorous, hospitable, friendly, welcoming, all of the above, in a very different way to how you might see in North America. So at first glance, you might think an Icelandic person is a little bit dour and quiet, but as soon as you scratch the surface, then you realize that the warmth of their hospitality is no different to anywhere else. It's just hiding under an Icelandic exterior. So yes, I find many things to keep me going back to Iceland every single year. I think it's a fantastic place to travel to, and I hope that when you travel there, you'll agree with me.
Thanks so much, Heather. You do a absolute.
Hold for a second. I've just lost your sound again. So let me pull this back up. Okay, I think that should be better. Sorry about that.
No worries. The way you've described it is sort of how I imagine Iceland when I see your photos or photos of other guides or our guests when they come back. It is an absolutely amazing place. Now, the way I like to sort of do these webinars is talking about this trip as if I am getting ready to go on this program. And it is the case that I actually haven't been. I've been to Iceland on my way to Greenland and the Reykjavik area, but I have not had the opportunity to go on this journey yet. So first and foremost, I need to know what to pack. I find that Iceland is incredibly perplexing to me on what I actually need to put in my luggage. So if you could tell us a little bit about what we need to pack and what kind of weather we can expect, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. So in Iceland, there's only one thing we can say about the weather really, is that the weather in Iceland is real. It changes all the time. I have had trips which have been sunny all the time. I've had trips which have had more than their fair share of showery days. But I would say with regards to the weather, that Iceland is a place where it should, at least at some point on the trip, rain. And I say it should because Iceland shines underneath the rain. It looks really amazing. There's species of mosses growing on the lava fields that come to life as soon as it starts to rain and fade away to shades of grey as soon as it stops raining. So although you might think, oh goodness, I hope it doesn't rain too much, I always am disappointed if we have a trip where it doesn't rain at all, because you need some rain to see what Iceland truly has to offer. That said, of course, being prepared with your gear is really important in a place that has diverse weather like Iceland does. So I'd say the most important thing to have is some really good waterproofs, waterproof jacket and waterproof pants. Those enable us to keep on going and go out and experience the beauty of the landscapes, whether it's showering or sunny or anything in between. Those waterproofs are really important. So good waterproofs. Same goes for shoes. Like some good strong walking shoes with a waterproof component. Just keeps us smiling throughout the days if it is a bit damp. It's nice to have dry toes. And also a hat and a pair of gloves, really important as well. It can be cool in Iceland. Icelandic people, I think they go sunbathing when it hits about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So a good pair of gloves and a good hat. It's also nice if your gloves do have a layer of waterproofing on them, just in case it's raining while we're out. Aside from those outer layers, just plenty of layers is important with the changeable weather. If we can layer up on the cool mornings and then shed layers throughout the day as the sun comes out and it warms up, that keeps us moving, keeps us comfortable and happy. So I'd say, kind of technical base layer t-shirts, some long sleeve layering sweaters, things like that, maybe a light jacket to wear underneath your rain jacket. And that way we are ready for all eventualities with regards to the weather.
Fantastic, thank you. And should we be bringing trekking poles on this trip?
The trekking poles are a good idea to use on the trip, and I'll let Sarah speak to this a tiny little bit, because it's been a question as to whether we're bringing our own or if we'll have them there this year.
So yeah, so for this year, if you are comfortable with hiking poles, or if you love hiking with them, we suggest that you bring them. We don't have them provided for all of our guests, so if you've got a pair that you're really into, please feel free to bring them. Excellent. So Heather, I know we do some photography trips. And I don't know anything about photography. I bring my phone. Sometimes I take a photo. I forget to look at it. So I am not the person to ask them what kind of camera to bring, but what would you suggest to bring on if you wanted to bring a camera and we're into taking photos?
Yeah, absolutely. So Iceland, of course, is a place where most people will want to take photos of some kind. One of the fantastic things, if you're not a big photographer and you haven't got a big fancy camera quite yet, then that is okay. The landscape photography that was a major part of our trips in Iceland is something that most cell phones are really quite good at these days. So even if you're just shooting with a cell phone, you can still get some pretty amazing shots in Iceland. And then if you're more into photography and you're looking for advice on which lenses to bring and things like that, space can be tight, of course, when you're traveling. So really the main things, if you do have a choice of lenses, would be to have something that's wide angle. We'd say less than 70 millimeters, but preferably around 35 or so, less if you want an even wider angle picture, something for landscape along those lines. And then also something with a telephoto zoom component. We're thinking something around 100 to 400 millimeters, somewhere in there should be completely sufficient. And that's for the wildlife and the zoomed in shots that you want to take.
Perfect, thank you for that. All right, I've packed bags.
Again. Sorry, at least I know how to.
No worries, the technology
okay.
got us back.
I don't know what's going on there, but here we are.
Here we are. I love it. We're in different countries and we're talking about Iceland. That's fantastic. All right, so I've packed my bags. I've got my camera, which is I'm going to call my phone. And I'm getting on the plane and I am arriving in Iceland. Can you tell me a little bit what that arrival experience feels like, and who is going to be picking me up from the airport?
Yes, absolutely. So this picture on the screen right now is what you see as you leave your plane and you head towards the arrivals hall in Reykjavik Airport. This sign appeals to my British sense of humor, I have to say. And so the Reykjavik Airport is pretty straightforward. It's quite small. It's well signed. It's quite straightforward to find your way from one side of it to the other. There's also some really nice places to grab a drink or something to eat if you're there as well. But once you arrive into the arrivals hall, then you pick up your bags as per normal, and you look to the left, you'll find somebody holding a Nat Hab sign waiting to transfer you to the hotel. The hotels are in Reykjavik proper, as the airport is out at Keflavik. So it's about a 40-45 minute drive from the airport, and that transfer is taken care of by Nat Hab.
Fantastic. I should note that if you are arriving to the group hotel that Nat Hab books, Nat Hab will take care of that transfer for you. But if it is the case that you're arriving early to a different hotel, you will need to arrange your own arrival transportation. Heather, one question that I'm always thinking of and stressing way too much about is how much money I should bring, and if I should be scouring the airport as soon as I land to find a place to exchange money. So can you tell me a little bit about if I can use USD, if I need it, can I use credit cards? What does that look like?
That's a very understandable concern. So when you arrive into the airport, there are ATMs there, but there's really no particular rush to pull out Icelandic cash as soon as you arrive. You're going into Reykjavik, which is a very well-equipped city. There are banks and ATMs around every corner pretty much. So you don't have to worry about getting cash immediately at the airport. US dollars is in cash is something that's not widely accepted. We're in Europe by the time we get to Iceland, and so the US cash is not generally going to be accepted by vendors, but they will take major credit and debit cards pretty much everywhere that we go. It's a pretty well connected country. Should be able to use those cards once you get there.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'll note that we do on Nat Hab trips include most things. There's some alcohol evenings where alcohol is not included, and then also the gratuity only for your expedition leader is not included. So that US cash is great for, and all of that information on what that recommended amount is listed in your pre-departure briefing. So just an FYI there. So Heather, I've landed, I am here, I have gotten to my hotel, and in creating this presentation, I thought we were really only driving around Iceland, but it turns out there is so much more involved in modes of transportation around Iceland. So can you tell us a little bit about what we can expect for how we will be transported from point A to point B?
For sure, yeah, we're doing a circumnavigation of a whole country, an island country as it is, and so in order to make the most of the landscapes and some of the really wild spaces in Iceland, we do use a huge variety of different forms of transportation. On the screen right now is one of our kind of standard buses, space in there for everybody to have a window seat and things like that. Nice, comfortable bus that transports us when we're traveling on paved and prepared, comfortable, smooth roads. And so a lot of our longer transfers from one place to another will be in a bus like that. And once we get to our different destinations, then we want to leave the beaten track. We want to get into the landscapes and away from the rest of the people who travel to Iceland. So we use vehicles like this one right here. This is a super Jeep. Icelandic people are very proud of their super Jeeps. I haven't seen them anywhere else. I'm sure they do exist in other places. But the wire you can see connecting the wheel to the inside of the vehicle means they can adjust the tire pressure from inside as we drive along, which is pretty impressive. We drive on some really rough terrain. There's a lot of rough roads on the interior of Iceland that are not paved in any way. They're kind of signposted, and that's about it. And so these vehicles enable us to travel over that terrain in the most comfortable way possible. It's still a bit of a rough ride occasionally, but the drivers are very skilled. They take it very carefully, and they get us into some places that we just wouldn't be able to get to if we didn't have access to these vehicles. So that's the super Jeeps. And then we also have some internal flights to get us from one spot to another in Iceland. We basically do a loop around the south, the east, and up into the north of Iceland. And then we'll fly to get to the West Fjords, which is even more off the beaten track. I would say it's one of the most off the beaten track areas we go to. So we do catch an Air Iceland scheduled flight for that. Go as much as any internal flight might go in North America as well. We go to the airport, we hop on board, they take care of our luggage, and then we get to where we want to go.
Fantastic. And the views are stunning in this area of the world. But we're not also using the super Jeeps, which I just love the name too, flying. We are also going on multiple boats during the course of this trip as well. Tell me a little bit about those experiences.
We are, yeah. So Iceland is surrounded by water and also has quite a lot of water on it. So a boat is a fantastic way to get around when we're there. We have 3 separate boat trips that are scheduled for us. 2 of them are up in the West Fjords. This picture here is one of them. So we have this quite comfortable cabin vessel that enables us to sit inside in the warm, out of the wind. We can travel quite a long distance in this boat because it is a little bit larger and we're a bit more cozy on the inside of the cabin. So we can explore further afield in this vessel. We also have a Zodiac ride, both in the West Fjords and on the Glacier Lagoon. And this one here is on the Glacier Lagoon. It's a fairly small Zodiac that enables us to weave between the chunks of ice and icebergs that are floating there as closely as we safely can. And so it's a pretty nimble little boat. And then we also have a slightly larger Zodiac that we use up in the West Fjords for our whale watching excursions.
Fantastic. It's amazing that there are so many modes of transportation on this trip, considering how small of a country Iceland is. So I'm always curious as to what the accommodation on wherever I'm going is, because I know it can vary drastically depending on the country that you're at. So tell us just a little bit about what accommodation feels like in Iceland.
Yeah, so the accommodation that we use, this is a longer trip and we move quite a lot. So we see a huge variety of accommodations. Every single one of them is unique in some way. They don't really go in for the cookie cutter style hotels with big chains and things like that. So everywhere we go, we'll see something a little bit different. The hotels are always clean, they're always comfortable, and they also have this kind of really cool architecture that seems to fit in to the wildness of the Icelandic landscape. Now, often the hotels are plonked down fairly in the middle of nowhere, it seems, as you drive along, but that means that you're right up there with these incredible vistas, not always in the middle of a town or city. The rooms themselves often are smaller than you might expect coming from North American hotels, but as I said, they're always comfortable, and they're often accompanied by the quirky Icelandic sense of humor. So you might see signs in the bathroom saying, "We know this bathroom is small, but it makes it really excellent for practicing your singing," and things like that. So yes, a great variety of hotels. Every single one of them
Sounds like we lost you for a second, Heather. Just making sure we can still hear you.
I'm here. Yeah, small blip.
Perfect. Well, we know what the accommodation looks like. I love how, I guess the best way to describe it is quirky that it is in Iceland. But tell us a little bit about the food that we're going to experience.
Yeah, here's an excellent picture of some food. Again, it's different everywhere that we go. Not somewhere that comes to mind first when you think of culinary destinations, but they are very proud of their food, and there's some really good chefs at some of the restaurants that we visit in Iceland itself. The diet in Iceland is pretty heavy on fish and lamb, and so it's standard on our trips with a lot of the restaurants that we visit. They'll provide a menu that normally has three or so options on it, and almost always fish and lamb will be two of them. So if you like fish and lamb, then you'll be a very, very happy person. Even if you're not sure about fish and lamb, it's probably very worthwhile trying it, because they have amazing ways of preparing this food, and it's always fresh, it's always delicious. Now, if you're vegetarian or have other dietary concerns, don't worry, there's always a vegetarian option as well. And then I'm also personally on the phone with all of our restaurants before we arrive for our meals. So if you have other dietary concerns, then they're always able to accommodate that. And we make sure to chat with them and make sure that we're getting things right for those dietary concerns.
Fantastic. It sounds phenomenal. And I know that in some of the programs that we go to, there's sort of a special experience where we get to understand more about how food is either handled or made. Can you tell us if there is a little bit of a special experience that we get in Iceland and what that might look like?
Yeah, so this picture on the screen right now, this is an incredible little organic farm that we visit as part of one of our travel days. We stop off at this farm, get a guided tour of the farming that they're doing there, kind of into the permaculture, and everything's organic, everything's kind of very farm to table movement at this little spot here. And they make their own pickles, preserves, crackers, things like that. So they provide us an afternoon tea, showing us this side of Iceland. Of course, Iceland being right on the very edge of the Arctic, it's not a place that's easy to grow all of these things, but the microclimate that they create at this tiny little farm is really something to see. So it's really nice to be connected with our food in this way when we go to that farm.
Sounds wonderful. So we've talked about our food, and now let's take some time and talk about what the activities that we're experiencing on this trip are actually like. I know that there is a lot of hiking in Iceland. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited to go at some point. But tell me a little bit about what these hikes feel like and what we can expect.
Yeah, so you're right. There is a lot of opportunity for hiking in Iceland, and again, I feel like I say the word diversity a lot of times on these webinars, but the trails that we walk on also very very diverse. Lots of different surfaces. It's not unusual for trails to be quite rough in Iceland, but then also if we're visiting waterfalls that are closer to the road and require a shorter hike, and then often the trail is much more prepared and maintained to get to those. So a diversity of terrain underfoot that we travel on. Our hikes in general are between kind of 1 to 3 miles or so. So we don't at any point kind of set out for the entire day to just hike. Instead, we use things like those super jeeps that we talked about earlier, and we use those to get us into the wild landscapes and then go on a few miles of hiking from there. Or we'll stop off, like this is close to Dettifoss right here. There's Dettifoss itself. So Dettifoss is about a mile round trip from the place where we park the bus. And we get to kind of walk through this beautiful geological landscape on the way before we see this incredible waterfall. So yeah, there's never a time on the trip where we're kind of saying, oh, we have to cover this amount of distance, otherwise we're going to be late for dinner or anything like that. We're on the relaxed, take photos, enjoy the experience, and travel on foot, as well as all those other forms of transportation that we talked about already.
Excellent. And it sounds like there is a glacier walk experience. Am I saying that correctly?
There is, and it's so neat. How often do you get the opportunity to walk on an actual glacier? So this picture here, you can see the group walking up onto the ice itself. This isn't something that we just wander off and do on our own. Of course, glaciers are a dynamic moving environment that can have risks associated with it. So instead, we go with professional glacier guides who are very good at what they do, at taking people onto the ice in a safe way to look at the features that you can see up there, to experience the surface of the ice up front. Iceland is a country that has been partially formed by ice, so being on it and up close and personal with it, I think is just such an incredible experience to have. And the walking underfoot as you're walking on the ice there, it's not terribly different to walking on a normal hiking trail. The only difference really is that you have some spiky crampons of the small, concise variety attached to your feet that enable you to grip really well as you walk on the ice.
It looks so much fun. So we can be hiking on glaciers one day, and then the next day we can be experiencing some geothermals. Tell me a little bit about this.
Yes, this is a high temperature geothermal area. We stop at least one of these as we go. This is where you can see Iceland's fiery core bubbling to the surface. And of course, there is sometimes an aroma of sulfur associated with that, but it's totally worth it for these dramatic landscapes. They look like they're from another planet. So normally when we get to a spot like this, it's well signed, because obviously you don't want to wander away from the trail in a spot like that. Icelandic officials know this. They sign these places very, very well. And it enables us to go and visit spots like this and explore kind of at our own pace. We don't have to hike across it to get to the other side or anything like that. We just arrive, check it out, get all the amazing atmospheric landscape shots that we want, and then move on to the next spot from there.
And the next spot, speaking about geothermals, going to hotter temperature water, there's so much on this itinerary. There's also natural hot springs. So do we get to experience natural hot springs on this trip?
We do, yeah. So when we get to Lake Mývatn, which is kind of in the interior of Iceland, we get to visit the Mývatn nature baths, which are pictured here. It's kind of like the Blue Lagoon, except in the north of Iceland instead of the south, much further away from Reykjavik, and therefore much less busy than the Blue Lagoon itself. Of course, it's still popular. It's a beautiful natural hot spring that's right there next to the town, but it's a really quintessential Icelandic experience to soak in such a beautiful natural spring as this one really is. So yeah, I'm really happy that this is on our itinerary. It's a really special and very relaxing afternoon activity to do.
Seems fantastic. Now, talking a little bit more about these super jeeps and the locations that they are able to go to. It sounds like we can go through a lot of different terrain. Can you tell me just a little bit about some of the locations that those super jeeps will take us?
Yes, absolutely. So this picture right here, this is from one of the first times that we encounter super jeeps, and when we drive up into the highlands of Iceland. And the highlands are, I mean, they're a place that's hard to visit. So they don't see the amount of visitorship that you see, say, along the south coast of Iceland, where all the famous waterfalls are and things like that. So instead, once we get up into the highlands, we have these moonscapes, volcanic moonscapes surrounding us. We're way away from the main tourist track, and we drive off into a landscape that looks just like what's on the screen right here, all the way out to Aspergi crater, which I believe Renata had a picture of earlier in the presentation there. So incredible water-filled craters, beautiful blue shiny lake in the bottom of it. And so we drive out experiencing this kind of high altitude tundra desert landscape, and then we do one of the longer hikes of the trip, actually, once we get to the end of the super jeep drive, out to see the actual crater itself. So yeah, similar to this landscape. Then once we get up to the West Fjords, we do a couple of different super jeep trips there. Sorry, just one super jeep trip there to go out to to this incredible peninsula where a farmer built a road around the peninsula. So you get incredible ocean views, cliff views. You get to drive along places that you would never normally get to drive along because of the hard work of this one farmer a few years ago. Apparently he wanted to get his kids to school, so he built them a road. And landscapes like that one we just saw are very common on that West Fjord super jeep trip. We'll stop at picnics along the way and see beautiful coastal landscapes like this.
It's incredible how much there is to see, and we haven't even gotten to the boat activities and what we can expect to see on some of these journeys. So tell me just a little bit about what these boat activities feel like.
Yeah, so this is on the Glacier Lagoon right here that you're seeing at the moment. So this is very, very calm water. It's a lagoon in the true sense of the word, but the glacier tongues that extend down into these lagoons carve off icebergs very, very frequently. So you end up with an accumulation of icebergs in the lake that we can cruise around at very, very slow speeds. So it's not a high speed adrenaline activity by any means, but you're cruising through these beautiful blue chunks of ice and getting up close and personal with them. This is one of our whale watching excursions. Oh, we've got a glacier as well. So up in the West Fjords, we'll go whale watching, get out into the middle of the fjords, try and see some humpback whales cruising up and down the fjords there. Though we do have chances to see other species of whale as well, but humpbacks is the most common that we'll see there. We're always on the lookout for orcas and minkies, dolphins, all those kinds of things. And then in all of our boat trips, we also try to make these stops along the way to get our feet on the ground and touch things, smell things, see things, get down on our hands and knees and take photos from different angles and all of those good things.
Fantastic. And I love that we provide our warmer gear, because it definitely, you can be walking around for 1 minute, and then as soon as you get the boat and the wind hits you.
Yeah, and some of those trips when we're on the Zodiacs, we get the full survival suit, and it's really incredible actually how cozy and warm you can feel inside those big survival suits. It is true adventure fashion.
Absolutely amazing. And I love how different we can go from glaciers and icebergs to beautiful scenery around us, and as you were saying before, even hopefully some whale watching as well. Excellent. Well, Heather, before we jump to questions, I'd love to just chat with you very briefly on, we're able to do all of these activities, and Iceland is known for its phenomenal scenery, but I wanted to just take a minute or two and chat about some of the wildlife that we might expect to see with questions.
Yes, absolutely. So there is wildlife in Iceland, plenty of it, even though we say this is not specifically a wildlife trip. It's all about the whole experience. The bird life in Iceland in the summers is incredible. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of birds migrating up to take advantage of the explosion of food and opportunities for breeding that provides for them. And so of course Iceland can be quite famous for puffins, like on the screen right here. And one of my favorites is actually the Arctic terns that we often see while we're there. Here's one right here. They're like this incredibly agile, fragile, but so tough bird that is not shy in the slightest. You know, they'll come over and visit us, that's for sure. And so we really get the chance to be immersed in these bird colonies on a frequent basis. I should add, of course, that is there's an element of seasonality in all of the bird viewings and wildflowers and everything like that in Iceland. Because it's such a short season, things tend to change from trip to trip. So we'll get back, and for another round, we'll see a whole different slew of wildflowers and things like that. It changes very, very quickly in Iceland. So birds definitely are something that we will see in Iceland in large numbers, even if you're not a birder. Just feeling the energy of those birds as they make it to their destination, and they do what they're supposed to do. They reproduce and they feed and they have such a great time. It's worth it to have that experience, even if you're not normally a bird watcher. There's also such a huge variety of marine life. So we mentioned the whales and things like that already, but we also look out for seals. I think we had a picture of one of those just a minute ago. And yeah, whales, dolphins, orcas, everything you can think about in the ocean, we will go and look for it.
Amazing. Thank you for that summary, Heather. This is really an all-encompassing trip of all that is Iceland, which is why I'm so excited to do this webinar with you. That being said, we've gone through the sort of all of the components of this incredible adventure, but I do think that we likely have some individuals on this webinar with some questions. So Kendall, can you tell us if we've got any questions that we can answer for everyone that's on the webinar today?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of questions for you, and I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you have a question today, you can submit it in your control panel under the questions field. And also, if we don't have time to get to your question today, our adventure specialists at our office are always happy to help. You can visit our website at nathab.com and find the phone number there. Okay, first question, Renata, really quickly, one COVID question for you before I jump into trip questions. What documentation is needed for proof of vaccination to get into Iceland?
So at this point, it is your your actual handheld vaccination card, not a photocopy of it. But as everything is developing so incredibly rapidly, when it comes to COVID, we will update you on exactly what documentation you need to bring to Iceland prior to the start of your trip. But yeah, just make sure that we'll be in touch with you on if that changes from your actual physical copy of the vaccination card.
Okay, great. And of course, with recent news with the volcano, a lot of people are wanting to know if there's any chance that they can visit the lava flow. Is there a chance for that?
Shall I jump on that one? Yeah, okay. So that is a great question. I think that everybody who comes to Iceland this year will want to see that if the eruption is continuing to happen. It's something that we've looked into and done some research on. We're also in ongoing contact with a local guide to see what's happening on the ground in Iceland. And we've decided not to try and include it as part of the actual trip. Everything is changing so quickly, and there's no guarantee that that eruption will still be happening by the time we go on our trips. So we found that it's going to be best if you are arriving a day earlier or staying a day later. that is something you can do from Reykjavik itself. The eruption is pretty close by. There's options to go by ATV and by helicopter with local operators in Iceland at the moment. And they just have such a good handle on what's going on with that eruption as it's happening. We just feel you have a better experience going to see it with them. They're the local experts, right? They know how to get there. They know where the eruption is right now. There is information on the internet as well that says you could maybe hike to the eruption itself. But that is something which our local guide is telling us is changing practically on a daily basis as the lava moves, as new vents open up. And so it's kind of a very long and arduous hike to get there. It's not a case of just driving up and seeing the erupting volcano. I really wish it was, but it's not. So it's generally considered to be about a 17-kilometer round trip hike on very rough terrain in challenging conditions to get to see a good view of the erupting volcano at the moment. So yes, we're recommending go with a local operator before or after the trip, and an ATV or helicopter would be the ways to look at.
Mm-hmm. So how many people are on each departure?
So the maximum is 14, and yeah, there we go. It's a short answer to that. 14 plus myself or another expedition leader and a local guide as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. So a few people are just wanting to know, one, how choppy can the seas be? Do they need to be prepared for possible seasickness? And how rough can the roads be? There's one person in particular who had neck surgery, and they're just wondering if it would be okay for them to go.
Sure, yeah, great questions. So on the boats, things like the Glacier Lagoon, I've never seen it rough there. It's very sheltered, and so the water is almost always calm on that one. You're still in a boat, it's still moving around, so there's a personal decision to be made there, but it's not a rough boat ride on the Glacier Lagoon. Once we get up into the West Fjords and we're going out in the cabin vessel or the whale watching trip, then it can be rougher up there. We're traveling in fjords, not on the open ocean. So it depends on the direction of the wind, whether the swell gets into the fjords. And I've seen it in those fjords be everything from super silky, glassy calm to quite a choppy ride. And that's something we'll know once we get there and we're kind of in the moment having the experience. The weather changes on a daily basis. And so if you do have concerns about how rough it might be on those trips, that is something we can talk about once we get there as well, and once we know those local conditions. Okay,
great. And as far as electrical plug adapters go, are those required? And if so, what kind do people need?
I'm sorry, I've lost the sound again for a second.
So I can handle that one while Heather gets the
Okay,
audio.
I'm back.
So Heather, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. So you will want to bring a European outlet connector, adapter, excuse me, on your trip. That information is also outlined if you are traveling with us in your pre-departure briefing, but there are, I do not believe, American outlets. Heather, feel free to elaborate on that.
You're correct. Very correct.
Okay, good job. So I just want to clarify, our trip manager is watching, and she just wants to clarify there's a total of 11 people on the trip instead of 14.
Okay.
Okay, next question. A lot of people are just wondering about the famous horses in Iceland. Is there an opportunity to see them?
Yeah, so the Icelandic horses are famous for good reason. They're really amazing little horses, and we see them along the sides of the road as we travel through Iceland. So it would be a pretty unusual trip that we didn't see them at some point. We don't have a specific horse experience on the itinerary at the moment. And but it is something, again, if you're there a day earlier or a day later, it's something that's very easy to organize from Reykjavik itself. There's some excellent stables that can help you to get up close and personal with the horses. And we just stop for photo opportunities and talk about the horses throughout the course of the trip as we go, because although they're of course not native to Iceland, they are as native as needs to be an important part of it.
So for people who are trying to decide what time of year to go to Iceland, we've got a lot of questions here, so I'm going to kind of throw them out at you all at once, so I can repeat them for you if necessary. So if people want to see wildflowers and waterfalls, when's the best time to go? How about whales? And specifically, if someone's trying to decide between July or August, do you have a preference?
Gosh, it's like I said, it is different every trip, so it's a very valid question as to what time you should go. With things like wildflowers, it's such a short summer in Iceland, right? Everything is coming to life in one explosive burst. And so while there is a sequence of these kinds of wildflowers earlier in the season and then the middle lot and then the later lot, there's not really a gap in the wildflowers. We just go through a progression of which flowers are ready now or later. And so I would say any time throughout July and into the first part of August, you're going to see wildflowers of some kind, of a great variety of kinds while you're in Iceland. As we get to the later parts of August, then things are going to start to quieten down, but you're still going to get different colors on the tundra. The berries are all going to be coming in, so we'll be able to eat our way around some of the locations. And so it's a constant process of change as we go through that. And I've never done a trip that hasn't seen flowers. Same with the waterfalls. Like I said, it can be some pretty real weather in Iceland, so there's always water moving around. And so yeah, the waterfalls are pretty much always very dramatic and impressive to look at. With the whales as well, throughout the summer, we have a good level of chances to see whales on our whale watching excursions. So I wouldn't worry too much about which trip as far as whales are concerned. In Reykjavik, even they do whale watching trips through the winter as well. So the oceans around Iceland are pretty alive. They don't necessarily follow the same summer patterns. Yeah, so that would be the whales. As far as the birds are concerned, earlier in the season, so through July and into the very first parts of August, we'll still see the breeding colonies of things like Arctic terns and puffins. So especially earlier in the season, you have better chances to see the Arctic tern chicks or to see the puffins coming into the burrows to feed their young and go through all of that process. And then as we go later into August, then again, things are going to start quietening down there. But those birds that are in the interior and that are thinking about leaving for the winter, they're going to start to move to the coastal areas. So although they're not doing their breeding cycle anymore, you're still going to see them in large numbers because they haven't left yet. It's also true that later in the season, so I'm talking into mid to late August now, later in the season, then birds are starting to arrive on the first stage of their migration from Greenland. So they will add to the numbers of birds in Iceland in that later stage of the season. Mm-hmm. Does that kind of cover all the questions there, or did I miss something?
Yeah, no, you did great. I'm going to throw a couple more at you, though. Can you talk about if there are any major weather differences between July and August? And also, a few people just want to know when the best time to see northern lights would be.
Sure. So yeah, the best time in the summer to see northern lights is going to be the latest trip that you can possibly find. Now we have to be careful saying that because it's still not Iceland's northern lights season. In Iceland, the biggest barrier to seeing the northern lights in the summer is the amount of sunlight that we have. So in July, in most parts of Iceland that we're going to spend time in, especially up in the north, it's 24-hour daylight. And so you can't see the northern lights when the sun is still shining. So if you are interested in the northern lights, there's a larger chance on the later trips because we actually start to have hours of darkness on the trip itself. No guarantees, they are hard to spot. It depends on the weather in Iceland itself. It depends on the space weather to see if the aurora is actually happening, and we just have better chances later on in August.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to throw some photography questions at you because we are at the top of the hour, so I just want to get a few more in before we call it. One, can you review the lens suggestions that you offered up earlier in the trip? Two, do you recommend a tripod? And is there any need for flash photography?
Sure. So the lens suggestions from earlier, that was a wide angle landscape lens, something less than 70 millimeters, preferably around 35 or less. The lower the number, the wider your angle, you get some more of the landscape into the shot. And then also some kind of telephoto or zoom lens, something between 100 and 400 millimeters, just to give you that extra reach for some of the more distant or small wildlife like the birds. And then for the tripods, definitely if you have a kind of lightweight portable tripod, something not too big and clunky, then that can be useful when we get to some of our waterfall locations and things like that. It's often nice with landscape photography to be able to pop the camera onto a tripod and not worry about that handshake. But again, we are traveling quite a lot on this itinerary. So if your tripod is big and heavy and it's going to be something that is a chore for you to lug around, then I would say you could equally as well get some good shots by holding your camera steady, using bits of the landscape to help you out. I wouldn't say that a tripod is an absolute necessity on these trips. And there was one more question in there, Kendall. What was that? Flash photography. It's really a lot of our photography is outside, and there's a lot of light in Iceland. So personally, I don't think I've ever used my flash while taking pictures in Iceland, except for maybe taking a few shots of the food every now and again. And so yeah, I would say it's not a high priority. The flash is not a high priority.
Okay, great. Okay, I think I'm going to call it there.
The sound again.
Oh, can you hear me? We'll give her a second. I'm going to call it there with questions, though. We are 5 minutes past the hour, so I'm going to call it there. Thank you so much, ladies. I know we didn't have time to get to everyone's questions today, so I'm very sorry for that, but please do know that our adventure specialists are always around to help you out. Give us a call at 800-543-8917. You can see that phone number on the screen right now. Send us an email at info@nathab.com, and you can always find more information on our trip page at our website at nathab.com. All right, ladies, I'm going to hand it back over to you for any closing comments you'd like to make, and we'll start with Heather.
Well, thanks, Kendall. Well, I'd just like to say it was a pleasure to get to talk about a place that I love so much, and I hope to see many of you in Iceland this summer or next summer or any summer, really. Happy travels.
Great. And Renata?
Thanks so much, Kendall. As always, thank you for facilitating these. Thank you, Heather, for telling us all about the amazing Iceland. And for those on this webinar who are coming with Nat Hab this summer, we hope that you have an absolutely life-changing experience. And for those that aren't, we hope that you consider it and really enjoyed this webinar. Thank you all so much.
Thanks again, ladies. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.